item like homeless.
Good evening. Welcome. I'm Shanna Cox, Vice Chair and Acting Chair tonight of the Lewiston Planning Board. I welcome all here this evening and call this meeting to order. I would ask Amy Smith for the roll call, please. Sorry, Amy, take a second if you'd like.
All good. Roger Dupre?
Here.
Mark Roy?
Here.
Michael Marcotte?
Present.
Shanna Cox?
Here.
Alex Pine?
Here.
Lee
Weisenberger Albert.
Weisenberger Albert?
Thank you. Here.
Amy Smith here.
Thank you so much. Please let the record reflect that we also are joined by our city staff tonight. John Connor, the Director of Planning and Code Enforcement. Craig Tebow. Thank you. There's a different way to pronounce it across the county. Our city planner. We also have Linda Tripp, our administrative assistant. And we are expecting Shelley Norton, our deputy director and city planner, when she arrives back from finance committee. And so Craig will be supporting us greatly tonight. Please let the record also reflect that this evening Lee will be a voting member of the board, and should Jama join us, he would remain an associate member tonight. Okay. Just checking on other things that I need to mention. Do we have any adjustments to the agenda?
No adjustments and no correspondence.
Thanks for saving me that bit. Great, we'll move right into public hearings. Put that down. This evening, our first public hearing is with SeniorsPlus, which has submitted a development review application for the construction of a new 11,900 square foot building in order to expand their existing services, including a kitchen for serving and distribution of meals, office space, and classroom space for seniors, all on a 1.28 acre parcel at 14 Mollison Way. This was continued from the June 10th, 2024 meeting. Craig, would you like to share more?
Happy to. So this is meant as a extension of the existing facility over at 8 Falcon Drive, the adjacent property. As mentioned, there will be services for food service, office space, commercial kitchen, and sort of classroom/congregation space. We view this as the previous use at 8 Falcon has been viewed sort of as a restaurant and office space. We will continue to view it that way as far as the zoning is concerned. That is an allowed use on a conforming lot, and no issues as far as zoning is concerned. The property is located in the community business zoning district. A large portion of the lot is located within the flood zone. The proposed building will be entirely outside of that flood zone. However, the sort of site improvements, including some of the pavement and the parking, will be inside the flood zone, and so I've been told that that will still need a flood permit to develop. Let's see, this project was continued from the June 10 meeting. We have been speaking with the applicant. One of the issues that they had run into was the parking. So some of the parking proposed in their initial plan was not in conformance with the required side setback. And so to sort of resolve that, they are moving the lot line further to the northeast. And that way, the parking will be in conformance. Both lots will remain in conformance. There's no zoning. There's no space and bulk issues with that. The sort of proposal will be in conformance with all regulations. Let's see, that was the parking and subdivision. Let's see, staff have, we've reviewed this. We have 3 conditions of approval that we are recommending. Turning to page 2, so staff recommends approval of the project with the following conditions. 1, prior to the issuance of a building permit, the applicant amends the plan to show a grease trap and provide a trap detail. 2, prior to beginning construction, the applicant receives a flood hazard development permit. And 3, prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy, a professional engineer must provide a stamped statement indicating all stormwater and site improvements have been completed in accordance with the approved plan, and that a note shall be placed on the site plan stating this. At the bottom of the page, you'll see action necessary with a motion. And Just looking if I've missed anything.
Craig, can you speak to whether the condition number 3 addresses the second bullet point under staff recommendations around Public Works concern for the 4-inch roof drain?
Say that again?
The way number 3, the condition is stated, it's that storm and site improvements have been completed in accordance with the approved plan. And so I'm just curious if our action tonight needs to address the concern of the 4-inch roof drain, which is seen on the plan. And perhaps the applicant will address this when they come up.
Sure. So the way that it was conveyed by Public Works is that it was a concern. It was not a requirement. Public Works would certainly like to see a larger roof drain, but they did not word that in a way that they would mandate that. So if the planning board want to add that as a condition of approval, that they expand that existing proposed roof drain, then that's entirely up to you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else that you wanted to add?
No, but I'm happy to address questions as they come.
Great. Are there any questions from the board for staff before we bring up the applicant?
I
Mr.
was
Burkett?
just curious. You were saying roof drain. So what would be the benefit of a larger roof drain?
Well, I would probably address that question to Public Works, but I could surmise that it would, having a larger roof drain would probably mean faster flow of water, less accumulation on the roof. I may even address that question to the applicant, because that's sort of over my head.
Yeah, I was just wondering how it would affect the soils around it and the floodplain and so forth. Not the building particularly.
I think the assumption would be if the roof drain couldn't capture all of the roof flow off the roughly 12,000 square feet, then it would flow off the roof, not in the drain, off into the pervious parking lot and not into the capture system. That would be my assumption,
So,
without an engineering degree. But there's some very smart folks in the room who I bet will speak to that.
I was just wondering about the flow and the dispersal, and which would be better, slower or faster dispersal?
Well, again, I'm not an engineer. That's a little bit out of my wheelhouse, but my sort of cursory understanding is that slower sort of
I think
flow
it's
is.
captured versus not captured. But I can't wait to find out.
Again, I'm more than happy to
We'll ask
defer
the
to.
applicant.
Yeah.
Thanks, Greg. It is on the record, you are not an engineer.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Gentlemen on this side, anyone else have a question for staff? Nope. Great, can we invite the applicant up? You can all come together, we can pull up another chair if needed. Please introduce yourself for the
Tom
record.
Platts from Platts Associates.
Drew Olechowski with Haley Ward.
Welcome.
Haley Ward will give most of this presentation because most of your questions are going to be technical to the site, and they prepared the site work for this project. I'm here just from the architectural firm. If you have any questions about the building itself or any decisions we made in that regard, but I'll let him begin his presentation.
Sure. So just to quickly address the roof drain topic, a 4-inch roof drain is our typical size roof drain for a building of this size, but we have no issues with upsizing it. We can provide the calculations just showing that it is sized adequately to handle the runoff that roof will see, but that's no problem.
Thanks.
And I had nothing more to add from what Craig presented. I think that was a pretty good presentation. But I guess I can just quickly go over the site plan. So as you can see, we did locate the building in the southwest corner of the property, just because this is the high point of the property, just trying to keep that out as much out of the floodplain as we could. You can see we have provided enough parking for both this building and the owner's adjacent property to the northeast. The plan is to basically share parking between the two buildings and to combine them all into one. We did want to have parking as close to this building as we could, just due to the nature of the users of this building. We just wanted the parking spaces to be nice and close. As Craig mentioned, one of our issues was the property line was a bit too close to those proposed spaces. You can see this was the original location of that line right here. And we are proposing to move it over here to the northeast side of that existing parking lot. And for what it's worth, this actually is where the parking setback or the property line was before Seniors Plus purchased this property. So we're essentially just moving it back to where it was originally. As far as stormwater goes, this is part of the spare time subdivision, for which no extra stormwater management features are required. Pretty much the one standard for the subdivision is that if we are under 75% lot coverage, then we essentially just have to direct it all to Stetson Brook, and from there, no further action is needed. So that's what we've done here. Utilities will all be provided from Mollison Way, down here on the south side of the building. Access, users of the site will be using the existing access to the Seniors Plus facility right over here. And most guests will visit this parking lot to the northeast. This parking lot over here is for the volunteers who will be helping with the meal delivery services. We also have a new entrance down here at the southwest corner for deliveries. We have a plan here showing that movement radii of that delivery truck, just showing how they'll access and leave the site. So I think those are the main items. We are proposing some minor landscaping as well. We were looking for a variance on the landscaping standard for this area. I believe we were required to have some sort of fence or screening along the parking area along Falcon Road. We are proposing not to do that just because it essentially isn't what all the other properties in the industrial park have. We are planting some new trees there, which is essentially what all the abutters have. So we're basically mirroring what they're doing. Yeah, and I think those are all the main points of this design. So I'd be happy to help with any other questions you might have.
Thanks. Let me start with just checking with Craig. It doesn't look like we're being asked to approve a waiver of any sort.
No, there wasn't, and this was sort of an earlier discussion. We, staff are not sort of, we're not pushing for that sort of planting, for that, buffering along. It really would have been just that, that single parking space closest to the street that would have needed some sort of, planting or fence, and to put like maybe a 15 to 20 foot fence along that port, it would have been, just sort of impractical.
So should this board approve what's been presented us today, then they'd be okay with carrying on with these plans with no need for
That's our
anything
recommendation.
above
Yeah.
landscaping? Okay.
You can approve as is with no sort of, because I believe in the landscaping requirements, the spacing of trees, spacing of shrubs can be, there's some language in the approval criteria that would allow, as practical with the site conditions, there's some flexibility. So it doesn't have to be 25 feet, just very rigid. There's some, there's flexibility.
Thank you. Anything else further from you at this moment?
No, we're here to answer any questions you might
Great.
have, but
Questions from the board?
The question, is this, the meal delivery service, is that replacing the Meals on Wheels facility?
Roger, will you pull your microphone up?
yes.
Thank you.
It's replacing that?
Other questions, Mr. Pine?
You weren't kidding when you said you shoehorned it into the lot to fit around the floodplain. how many inches between the wall of the building and the floodplain in the courtyard area?
Very tight.
I'm just kidding. On a more serious note, though, you were saying that the stormwater drainage right now is going to go into Stetson Brook.
Yep, that's correct.
That's the plan, and there's like no catchment. It just outflows.
Yep, that's right.
Is there any concern around, considering that it is in a floodplain, that it's going to sort of negatively impact the flood situation? Or has that work been
Well,
done?
just to be clear, we're not outfalling directly into Stetson Brook. We're actually tying into the existing storm drain system
gotcha.
up here in the northwest corner of the property.
Got it. Okay. So all of the impervious surfaces are draining into that.
Yep, that's correct.
And then-
it's our understanding that existing drainage system has been sized for that 75% lot coverage requirement.
Got it. Okay. And then how much is the grading on the property going to change? How much is this going to affect that existing floodplain? Just thinking about it in terms of, we're increasing impermeable surface, and with flooding, more space for water to spread out is usually a good thing. This seems like it's going to maybe reduce that a little bit. Not that it's a
Sure.
huge concern, I'm just curious if you...
So yeah, we were attempting to match existing grade as closely as possible. As far as the flood volume capacity, that is something that we look at with the flood hazard permit that we're going to need to obtain at some point. We do need to do an analysis of if we are filling that flood zone significantly, and if we are, you do have to provide compensation storage elsewhere on the property. So if that does end up needing to happen, that gets taken care of with that flood permit. And I think we have adequate space on the northern end of the property to provide that if needed.
Neat. And do you have any, I see some, good pedestrian infrastructure here to navigate the parking lot. Is there plans to have bicycle facilities at all for volunteers? I don't know if that's included on the plan set.
I am not sure if we added that.
No,
Not
there isn't
currently.
right now.
No,
I mean,
no.
certainly adequate room should we need bike racks, or if that comes up, they have adequate room for it.
Okay, wonderful. Just making sure. I know the surrounding neighborhood does have some sidewalks and some pedestrian infrastructure, and I've certainly ridden my bicycle through there, so
Yeah.
want to make sure that's an option for folks too, if they're
Yeah,
going to
I think as
volunteer.
they move in and employees' needs, we have plenty of room to do that kind of stuff.
Wonderful.
Thanks. Further questions from the board? Mr. Marcotte?
Whereas the original Lot 5 before the change in lot line was all wooded, how much vegetation is going to go back on that property?
On the subject parcel, we are proposing to clear all of the vegetation that's there right now. Looking back at historic images, this lot actually was completely mowed and cleared at one point, not so long ago.
Okay, so the map in here with trees is not current.
That's correct.
Okay.
There are trees there now. Like I said, we are proposing to clear the whole lot and have a nice landscaped lawn area at the rear there.
Because I'm just wondering about the aesthetics as you're driving through Mollison Way. With respect to the lot line, does that negatively impact Lot 8 by moving it to the middle of the parking lot?
No, like I mentioned, this was actually where the lot line was prior to SeniorsPlus purchasing the property, so we're not expecting any issues from that. As far as all the setbacks and space and bulk standards go, we still adhere to all of those, even with the new location.
Okay, so that second lot, per se, for Lot 8 was not necessary for Lot 8's requirements?
That's correct.
Okay. That's all I have now.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board? Okay. Given that this is a public hearing, I am going to open it up for public hearing. If you'd like to speak on this agenda item, you'd bring yourself to the podium, introduce yourself by name and address, and speak for no more than 3 minutes. Last call. I'll close the public hearing on that one. Any further comments or questions for staff or the applicant from the board? If not, I'd seek a motion. Yes, sir. Anybody. I love the confusion of it.
Make a motion that the application submitted...
Oops, sorry. Will you pull up your mic for this part? Thank you.
Thought it was, sorry. Make a motion that the application submitted by Platts Associates on behalf of SeniorsPlus for the construction of an 11,900 square foot building at 14 Mollison Way to be used to expand the services and operating capacity of SeniorsPlus meets all of the necessary standards contained in the zoning and land use code, including but not limited to Article 13, Section 4, approval criteria, and Section 5, coordination with the state subdivision law, and that approval be granted with the following conditions. According to staff recommendations, 1, prior to the issuance of a building permit, the applicant amends the plans to show a grease trap and provide a trap detail. 2, prior to beginning construction, the applicant receives a flood hazard development permit. 3, prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy, a professional engineer must provide a stamped statement indicating all stormwater and site improvements have been completed in accordance with the approved plan, and that a note shall be placed on the site plan stating this.
Thank you. Any further discussion from the board? We'll call the roll. Mr. Dupree?
Yes.
Oh, do we need to second the motion?
Oh, yes, very much
Yes.
so. Nice catch,
Second.
everybody. Thank you. Let the record reflect. Mr. Dupree, would you like to do that again?
Yes.
Mr. Roy?
Yes.
Mr. Marcotte?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Pine.
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Weisenberger Albert?
Yes.
And myself is yes as well. Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck. Thank you for the services that you'll be offering in that. So it will be.
It's not.
We're going to move to our next public hearing. This is for the Maine Museum of Innovation, Learning, and Labor, otherwise known as the Maine MILL, which has submitted a development review application for the refurbishment of an existing 8,167 square foot building and construction of a 3,153 square foot addition on a 1.89 acre parcel at 1 Beech Street. This was continued from the June 10th, 2024 meeting, and I believe Shelley is taking this one. Welcome. Thank you for joining us from Finance.
Oh, yes, hi. We're just getting things set up
Loading
here so
something
you
in
can
there.
see the application. Is that what you're expecting to see?
Yeah, it's just basically
Okay,
the
perfect.
application. Yeah, good, okay. Okay. Hopefully you've all had a chance to go through the numerous
Thank you.
pages of.
Mr. Platts, Shelley's going to introduce the
you're
staff
gonna go
portion first.
Okay, all right. Jumping the gun.
Okay.
It feels like a mid-July meeting from top to bottom. No worries. Ms. Norton.
Okay, so this project is located in the Riverfront zoning district. It has contaminated soils on site, so the project will be built primarily above the existing grades. As you're already familiar with the project, last meeting, there was a land disposition that was brought before you that dealt with this area, but just to orient you, Simmerpeen Park and Beech Street are on the north. The Androscoggin River is to the west of this project. 49 Beech Street and the canal, which is city-owned, are to the south, and 35 Beech Street, which is to the east, contains a vacant building. The city is planning to extend Beech Street. It currently dead ends, I think, just before this project site, but we will be extending it so it will go past where they're planning on connecting into Beech Street in a timeline that works with their construction schedule. So they've talked to Public Works about that. As well as extending the street, we will be extending the water line in the street, and there's already an existing sewer that they can use. So they'll be hooking up to city sewer and water in the Beech Street roadway. There is an allowance in the ordinance that they can direct discharge to the canal and the river with Director of Public Works approval. They did receive that waiver. Their stormwater plan has been reviewed. They're reducing the amount of impervious on site from the existing condition with this proposal. So as I made reference last month, the board, or earlier this month rather, the board reviewed a sale agreement essentially, and I just wanted to give an update on that. It went to Finance Committee tonight and was approved, and it will be going to the City Council on the 20th of August. So the intent of all parties is that potentially that will be approved by City Council. I do have a recommendation for a couple of conditions of approval related to this. The first was if for some reason that doesn't go through, that they would come back with an amended site plan to the city related to the portion of land that they're looking to purchase that they've showed as part of this development, as well as the stormwater easement. If it does go through, then they would need to merge that portion of land with their parcel, as it doesn't have frontage or lot size. So,
Can I ask a clarifying question on that?
yes.
Are you referencing condition number 2 in the memo? That references the merging?
Yes. Yep. Number 2 is the merger, and and number 1 is the if for some reason the council doesn't approve the sale kind of clause.
So the language of if covers the eventuality of whatever pathways might be taken by council?
Exactly. Yep.
Thanks.
So the project involves developing a new addition onto the museum, refurbishing the existing mill building on site, developing a new 67-space parking lot, that comes off of Beech Street. There's a secondary connection from the parking lot to Beech Street, so shown in dashed lines. So that is part of the plan, that they would be able to come through the site and come completely through without having to turn around with buses and larger equipment. As you're also aware, they're showing the Riverfront Island Trail that's going to be extended through the site. That was part of that purchase agreement, was the agreement for an easement that's still to be determined as far as exact location along the riverfront for the trail to be extended by the city. In order to make the design that they're showing happen, they've requested a couple of different waivers. You have hopefully seen by now the elevations as well as the renderings that they're showing of the addition itself. This is in the design district, so that architecture on the Beech Street side is required to meet certain standards. And there are some practical challenges with doing so with this current design. So the waivers that they're requesting, or that staff is recommending that they need, the first one is to the requirement of the first floor of a commercial building that there be 50% window and door glazing. They'll talk about this, but because the museum has collections that they wish to not have direct light exposure, they're requesting that waiver. We have a requirement that there be no parking in the front setbacks because of where the existing building is located. There's a large expansive area between Beech Street and the building. They're asking to be able to put their parking in that location and to utilize that space for a parking lot. And then the principal facade of the building and the public right-of-way, they're required to do landscaping, but again, that is related to the same issue that they want to put parking between the building and the road. So really, they need those two different waivers. They have asked you to consider whether a waiver is required for blank wall standards. So the glass entry area that protrudes out to the right of that, you can see a little bit in this rendering. There's another rendering that shows it in more detail, that they're proposing a Corten steel panel that's punctured in a design that's related to a textile design. The question really is whether that constitutes a blank wall. As far as, there isn't the relief that our definition of blank wall that you see in the ordinance discusses, but there is a question, is it a substantial visual change? So it's really up for the board to determine whether you feel like a blank wall is present. If so, it would need a waiver. Or if you want to make a finding that it's not a blank wall under that definition and standard. So that's really for the board to consider. So those are the three waivers and the one finding or waiver that we're recommending would need to be made for this current design to be approved. We did have responses back from all reviewing departments. Public Works and Planning had comments. Those comments have all been addressed. So we do have those two conditions of approval that we've already talked about, and then a third one that really just has to do with making sure that an engineer reviews the construction and certifies that it's been done in accordance with the plans.
Thank you. Before we move to any planning board questions for the staff, I'd like to offer something for the planning board to consider on the point of a finding of a blank wall, in part before we hear from the applicant, because I think it is important that this board recognizes whatever choice we make tonight will set a precedent. And I I would love for us to have that discussion about what a blank wall is and not just about this proposal. I'm very comfortable with the designs that I see. I would absolutely vote in favor for a waiver for this. I would be concerned if we set a precedent that did not require a waiver, and thus anybody could put perforated metal up that is not of artistic design or of thought or of even consideration for the board, and that might set a precedent. And so I want both the applicant and the board to be thinking about the way in which we could have some dialogue about that this evening that reflects the precedent we want to set and that is not reflective just of the designs in front of us. So we can discuss that after. Any questions for staff before we move to the applicant? Mr. Dupree.
Shelley, can you review the conditions that we set for height and width on a blank wall
It's 15 feet in both dimension.
in both directions?
Yeah.
And the height of this particular ironwork, how high above the ground is that?
Is that something the applicant can share? There is a change in material, so the bottom portion has a black brick or stone, and then there's the metal that hangs over above it, so it would really be that metal face that we'd be looking for the dimension on.
Yeah.
So the height would be from that point up?
Yeah, so change in materials counts, so it's really just that, the metal area. It wouldn't include the stone
It's probably
area.
30, 28 or 30. It's about 28 or 30 of just the metal.
I love that you're whispering. It's okay. Go ahead and answer it.
Well, you weren't, now I don't know. It's about 28 or 30 feet, just the metal portion. So you
Top
got
to
the-
bottom,
you
side
got
to
the- You
side.
got the first floor, it's gonna go up about 12 feet, and then you're up at 40 at the top, so, yeah.
Thank you. We will definitely come
Yeah,
back to that.
yeah.
Other questions from the board for staff? Hearing none, we'd welcome the applicant to introduce themselves by name and affiliation, and then offer your presentation.
Okay, I think what we'll start with, I'll introduce, and then Rachel's going to give a little introduction just of the museum. So Tom Platts, Platts Associates, Gabrielle Russell from Platts Associates, and
Travis Letelier, civil engineer.
and then Rachel's just going to give you a little introduction about the museum.
Sounds great.
You probably all know her anyway, but.
A museum?
Hi. For those of you I don't know, nice to meet you. Nice to see some friendly faces. So I'm Rachel Ferrante. I'm the executive director of Maine MILL. The Maine MILL is a tribute to the people, industries, and heritage that built our past, enrich our present, and create our future. This is obviously, as you know, the renovation and addition to the Camden Yarns Mill, which will include permanent exhibition, gallery space, dedicated classrooms, expanded educational and community programming, creating an iconic tourism destination with a robust marketing plan. That's what I got.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I think Shelley's probably given a great recap of everything. Certainly you don't want to hear me say that again. So we're here mostly to answer questions, give you a little kind of recap. You can see the rendering, which gives you a pretty good sense of the site. The existing building's about 15,000 square feet. We're adding another maybe 8,000 square feet in additional area. The old building will house the kind of the permanent collection, all the things you're familiar with about the mills and the looms and shoemaking equipment. And then the second floor will be a kind of what we call a temporary gallery. She'll either bring in or she'll put up her own exhibits in that. The new part will house bathrooms, coat rooms, main entryway, a gallery in the second floor will be a new gallery. That glass promenade will be part of a gallery which will showpiece a piece that will be lit up. I think we can show you a night shot, kind of what this will look like with some piece in there. It also gives you a look at that, what we'll call blank wall. The blank wall is Corten steel. It's perforated with holes from one of the original Bates Mill patterns. Behind it will be lights, so that at night you can see it'll light up, which we certainly don't think of it as blank, but I understand by definition what you guys have to think of as blank. I think one of the waivers that we're talking about is that parking lot. Because we're making use of the existing building, and it's so far away from the street, it's really our only place to park on the lot. So we would hope we would get that.
Also because of the capped
Right.
area on the side of the building, on the riverside, there's,
Yeah, there's, if you, that would, yeah, we could show it to you on the site plan. Part of this, because of this, originally this site had 10 mill buildings on it. If you include this site and the PAMCO building in front of it, the PAMCO building was actually connected to this building. It went through about 4 other buildings with bridges. So out in front of the building towards the river, where Gabby's kind of got the marker, there's coal ash under there, which is what was under every one of these mills. DEP allowed it to be capped, it's VRAPed, but we're not going to do anything on it. So that limits our site a little bit.
Thank you.
Happy to answer any questions. I mean, I'm sure there may be lots of them, and any one of the 3 of us will field them if you have them.
I do think the additional information of not just the perforation of the steel, but that it is lit behind, actually gives us a good opportunity to discuss that in a different way. Discussion or questions from the board? Mr. Pine?
I'd love to talk about the parking situation first before we get into the perforated steel, just because I think that's going to be a longer conversation. I'm wondering, for the number of parking spaces, are you exceeding the requirements for how the building's going to be used?
By 3 spaces, I think.
By 3 spaces.
Barely.
Yeah, no, and that's great, and I recognize the need for parking for a building like this.
Yeah.
One thing I do wonder about is its relationship with the park and its relationship with the trail, and that the parking lot does sort of separate it, right?
Right.
So I don't know if there's any, it looks like the property line is right where the parking ends, so
Yep.
landscaping and things on Beech Street are really up to the city and not.
Yeah,
not
we're
up-
showing some trees along the street there.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do have 4 or 5 feet, so there will be
Yeah.
a shrub buffer and street trees there. And then on the other side of Beech Street, the city is actually going to have a single row of parking.
Got it. One thing I wonder about, and this would probably require some coordination with the city, is you have this beautiful entrance into the building with the millstone pattern on the ground, and it goes out into the parking lot. That's very inviting for folks coming in from the parking lot. I wonder if there would be a way, it would require the elimination of maybe 1 or 2 spots to continue that path across the parking lot, across Beech Street, and so it connects with Simard Payne. So it is more welcoming on sort of a pedestrian scale from a pedestrian standpoint, and that view into the doorways of the museum is made more welcoming with sort of removal of shrubbery and trees there, so that, it's very clear where the entrance is for pedestrian and cyclists.
Yeah, that would be easy to do, and we have a couple extra spaces to spare, so we could do that.
Yeah, and maybe there's a way to...
And this is falling into the recorded notes so that it can be maybe considered later by city planners as they design that street. Perhaps that would look something similar to the tie-in near the station.
Yeah, at this point, actually, the streets aren't coming up quite that far, right? That's.
No, the street,
Yeah.
I appreciated Ms. Norton referencing
Yeah.
it as a street, and having spent a considerable amount of time there this past week. I can tell you that it is dirt and potholes with rocks. As soon as you cross that little bridge that we made the improvements on, and I love that we endeavor to call it a street currently, and I think it optimistically could be one someday, but it is not currently looking that
And
way.
it will be all the way up beyond our entry,
Yeah,
and so we're getting there.
Yeah.
yeah.
But we can do that.
And I think that's maybe another point to make about this is that, and we're calling it a street, but in a lot of ways the function it's serving is access to the parking lot for this. And so, we're not interrupting people traveling through. This is merely a convenient entrance to the museum and a convenient space for people to park their cars to enjoy the park. And so I think making sure that it is people space first, car space second is really important to this being successful, and not separate from the rest of everything that's going on there.
And actually, once the city builds that street up, It won't be a dirt road beyond
Correct.
it. It'll be landscaped
Yeah.
and the entryway would be nice, yeah.
Yeah.
It'll connect to the path.
Yeah, because I remember, Mary Ann Brenchek, before she left the city, showed us some initial ideas around Beech Street of having a turnaround at the end that was
Yeah.
like semi-pedestrian and sometimes closed to vehicle traffic and all these things. And this seems a little different from that. And, I don't know what the
Are
city
we
plans
seeing
still
street
are.
design, or are we seeing the architectural renderings for the parcel of which we're considering? I'm just curious about the desires that you're voicing and how that might fall into a Riverfront Island Master Plan
Yeah.
update.
And I can just give you a quick update. We are currently working on master planning with the landscape architecture firm that the city has a contract with. And there is a design for basically a dead end of Beech Street to be a roundabout that is pedestrian materials, but vehicle accessible, so that fire trucks, buses can turn around in it. But the intent is that visually, it's not asphalt. It doesn't look like a street at the end.
So I guess what I wonder with that, that turnaround, and I know this is, secondary to the project, but again, because there isn't a business or location beyond this sort of Beech Street is functioning as a driveway for this project. That would be located off to the left-hand side, sort of close to where all of the pedestrian paths come together. I think that's what I remember from Mary Ann's presentation, is that pedestrian path area would actually be part of the roundabout. And I guess what I wonder is if we could free up space with the agreement of the museum, that their parking lot serves as a turnaround as well. I don't know if that would cause vehicle flow issues, but again, sort of thinking about, if we're setting aside all this space to sort of fundamentally do all the same things. We have an extra driveway for the museum, we have a turnaround for city vehicles, we have all these things taking up a lot more space. If we could free up space, again, to make it more pedestrian, more park user friendly, I think that could be an interesting concept. I know that's second to what we're doing here. I think for me, if we're requesting, the ability to put parking within the setback, I think my one request would be that we perforate that visually and allow for the flow of pedestrian traffic. But I would encourage the city and the applicant to talk more
That
about
won't be a problem.
possibilities
Yeah.
to reduce paved area and just, make it more inviting for museum goers and for folks using the park. I think it could be a real nice win-win for everyone. Oh, and then also, I noticed you had bicycle parking in the rendering, and that's much appreciated. That's wonderful to have. As someone who would definitely bike to the museum, happy to see that.
Other questions or comments from the board on parking first? Before we move to the wall, I would just like to note that while it might feel like, and a number of times, Mr. Pine, you referenced that this is a driveway for the mill, largely, I will say, as somebody who activates the park regularly, it actually serves quite a bit of needs for any type of activity, including handicap accessible parking, vendor parking, and a number of other things. And so I would just note that the opportunity to look at a pedestrian tie-in from those areas, not just at the end in the turnabout, but midway, where people might be coming from the park into the museum, or when the park is activated, that the pedestrian overlap with people coming to their cars and cars coming in and out can be a little dicey. And so encouraging the city to look at that street as a point of access for the park as well as the mill, and that any integrated opportunities to think about that will increase the safety, particularly as you bring in more children and folks of a broader age range or mobility range. Shall we move to the perforated wall, of which I'm not calling a blank wall? I appreciate the applicant. I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like to add, but we understand that it is 28 some odd feet-ish. It is perforated, it is designed, I would say maybe even sculpted, to look like a Bates Mill bread spread template, which harkens to our city's history, and that it is backlit. Are all of those roughly correct?
Yeah.
All right, comments or discussion from the board? Yes.
So I appreciate hearing about the perforated nature, the lighting. Does the metal patina, does it rust as well?
The way Corten works is it initially rusts.
Yeah.
And then stabilizes, and that's it. It doesn't rust through.
Got it.
It's just a coating. It's used on a lot of bridges, on towers. For that very reason, you don't have to paint it. You really don't do anything to it after it gets that initial coat. I think you'll see CMP, or it's now Brookfield, did Core 10 poles behind the PEX building for that same reason. They don't want to be climbing up 60 feet painting them every few years.
Great.
Pretty rust, shall we call it?
No, and
Yeah,
I ask to celebrate it and thinking
Yeah,
that it's
yeah.
adding another dimension yet again as we consider the waiver, so.
And again, for us, it's kind of part of the industrial nature of this museum. We've tried to use elements that celebrate what the museum is.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Marcotte, and then we'll go to Mr. Roy.
So over time, the rain, acid rain, wind conditions, et cetera, there would be no, like drippage of, lack of a better word, rust.
Yeah, no, it should be fine.
You won't see streaks coming down the side of it.
No. I think if you look at those other examples in town, they're pretty stable.
No discoloration,
No.
won't turn green.
No, it won't turn green.
Looking at the waiver, and from what I see, I don't consider it a blank wall. It's a nice artistical design, and maybe we can add some language to the ordinance, the code, that accommodates this, particularly so that going forward, this doesn't necessarily set a precedent. This would be part of anything that would be acceptable by other developers.
And it's a particular animal. Museums just don't like windows.
Yeah.
That's what, it makes it tough.
Understandably so. Mr. Roy?
Can you just articulate a little bit more about why, what your arguments are for why it doesn't constitute a blank wall? I know you wrote it in here, but why it doesn't meet the definition of a blank wall?
Well, it's difficult because it obviously is a blank wall in some respects. For us, it's more of an art facade. It's got plenty of penetrations. It's got light like windows would have if there was light behind the windows. So I don't think it gives off the same feel that a blank wall would have. When you look at just a monolithic blank wall with no architecture, no perforations, no light, is very different than what this wall is going to feel like.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Pine?
I just wanted to spend a little time to unpack the ordinance around a blank wall and maybe talk a little bit about, who knows who wrote it, but talking a little bit about what I see as the intention behind it. And maybe in that process we can talk about maybe we want to have a revision here or something like that. But sort of maybe looking at this with an architectural lens might be helpful. So, it reads, a blank wall in the definition is a portion of the exterior facade of a building that does not include windows or doors, columns, pilasters, or pilaster, or other building articulation greater than 6 inches in depth, or a substantial visual change including color and material change. Blank wall applies both in a vertical and horizontal direction.
Can we ask a question of the applicant for a quick second?
Sure.
On that? Do you know the depth between the lighting behind the wall and the exterior facade of the wall?
We're still working on it. It's probably going to be at least 8 inches.
It's more than 6.
Because we've got to get the lighting in there, and we have to have an ability to change the lights in there.
Yeah.
So we have to have some workroom behind there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my mind was going there too. But what I'm really reading here is that this ordinance is wanting to make sure that we have visual interest on the surface of a building. We want that visual interest to be non-monotonous, so we don't want, bricks can be very visually interesting, but a whole wall of bricks is still a wall. And that we want that visual interest to be permanent. We don't want it to be mural. We don't want it to be paint. Because, we're talking about color and material change, right? We're not just talking about color change. We're not just talking about paint. And so I feel with this, we have a unified material, that's true, but that visual interest is there and it's permanently put into the panel. It's not going anywhere. And a lot of the visual interest with Core 10 is that texture, the sort of the natural texture that it develops over time as it develops that patina. So I think, Shanna, where you're going with, like, do we have that depth caused by the perforation, which gives you that visual interest? That's really what we're talking about. I think it kind of, in my mind, meets that definition, that 6-inch depth. I think what we want to be careful about, though, is like, you know, if someone puts up, you know, a steel screen that has a repetitive pattern, you know, it's like just mesh, and it's 6 inches off the building, does that still count? I think what we want to think about is that variation, right? Substantial visual change, I think, is what we're seeing here. So we have the 6 inches in depth and the substantial visual change in the fact that it's not a repetitive pattern.
And one could argue, we got 1,000 windows in there. They're very small, but
Well, I would add that not only do I think in this case, with this definition and that which you've described, I think you not only pass this test, but I think I would not advocate for a language change, because I think the intention is not only for these pieces to be assessed and assured, but for that discussion to happen and for us to assure it. And I think this language has done exactly that which we'd want, which is for an applicant to feel free to be creative and to bring that forward, for a process to be offered, for us to have the criteria we need, and for this discussion to happen. I think my concern with any type of significant language change is that it would become too restrictive to either hinder innovation or so descriptive that one would think that they could just choose to do it in the way they had assumed, and that they had assured that it was not a blank wall without it being something we addressed in this process.
Mm-hmm.
That's my opinion, anyway. Mr. Dupree?
The Martha Washington bedspread pattern is on the brick to the right of the, right in that area there.
Yeah.
That's the core 10.
yeah, that's the steel.
That is the wall we're discussing, and that material.
And the perforations are in that.
Can you enlarge that, Ms. Russell?
Yeah.
Now, the backlighting is gonna be white.
Probably not bright, not pure white. I'd think a little more towards amber. I don't want it to be a soft
Cute.
white, not a
Just to
little.
highlight the pattern.
Yeah.
Other discussion from the board on the blank wall clause? Any other discussion or questions for the applicant? Hearing none, we're going to open this up to a public hearing, though there is limited public. I open the public hearing. If there's anyone who would like to speak on behalf of this project, they'd go to the podium, offer their name and address, and speak no more than 3 minutes. Seeing none, bring it back to the board. Any final discussion before we entertain a motion? Would anybody like to make a motion? It's a lengthy one. Take a deep breath.
I'll go for it. Let's see. The board would like to make a motion, or first, we'd like to make a finding that the application submitted by the Maine Museum of Innovation, Learning, and Labor, Maine MILL. Oh, sorry, I did not read this right. Make a finding that I think there might be a typo here. Application submitted by the Maine Museum of Innovation, Learning, and Labor, Maine MILL, that the core 10 steel portion of the north facade of the building addition is not a blank wall, because the design provides a substantial visual change as the metal is punctured with a pattern and light can be seen through it.
And its depth is more than 6 inches.
And its depth is more than 6 inches from the main structure.
Thank you. Do we need to second a finding or call roll?
I would definitely call roll.
Okay.
Then
Then we will welcome a second for the sake of good records.
I second.
Thank you so much. I'll call a roll. Mr. Dupree?
Yes.
Mr. Roy?
Yes.
Mr. Marcotte?
Yes.
Mr. Pine?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Weisenberger?
Yes.
And myself, yes, as well. Thank you. Shall you carry on?
Sure.
Thank you.
We would now like to make a motion that the application submitted by Maine MILL for the refurbishment of an existing 8,167 square foot building and the construction of a 3,153 square foot addition on a 1.89 acre parcel at 1 Beech Street meets the criteria for a waiver request in Article 11, Section 24, Subsection 5, Subsection H, Design District Overlay District for a blank wall for the Corten steel area on the north facade of the building, and that approval be granted.
I think you're trying to do the motion above it, which was
Oh.
approval be granted for waivers 1 through 3.
Oh, sorry. Oops.
Shall we pick up after 1 Beech Street?
Yeah. Meets the criteria for granting a waiver request in Article 11, Section 24, 5H, Design Overlay District, and that approval be granted for waivers 1 through 3 as described in the application.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Dupree, thank you. I'll call roll. Mr. Dupree?
Yes.
Mr. Roy?
Yes.
Mr. Marcotte?
Yes.
Mr. Pine?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Weisenberger Albert?
Yes.
And myself, yes. I believe we have one more motion on the docket.
Yes. Okay, and I'll read the right one this time. Make a motion, tonight we will make a motion that the application submitted by Maine MILL for the refurbishment of an existing 8,167 square foot building and the construction of a 3,153 square foot addition on a 1.89 acre parcel at 1 Beech Street meets all the necessary criteria contained in the zoning and land use code, including but not limited to Article 13, Section 4, approval criteria, and that approval be granted with the following conditions. That prior to the issuance of a building permit, the drainage easement from the city and land acquisition of a portion of 49 Beech Street be executed or the project apply for and be granted site plan amendment. That prior to the issuance of a building permit, if the 2,458 square foot portion of 49 Beech Street is acquired, that it be merged with 1 Beech Street. That prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy, a professional engineer must provide a stamped statement indicating that all stormwater and site improvements have been completed in accordance with the approved plans, and that a note be placed on the site plan stating this condition.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Dupree, thank you. Any further discussion? I'll call roll. Mr. Dupree?
Yes.
Mr. Roy?
Yes.
Mr. Marcotte?
Yes.
Mr. Pine?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Weisenberger Albert?
Yes.
Myself, yes. Thank you. Congratulations.
And it looks beautiful.
Have a heck of
It's
an opening
gorgeous.
party. It's going to be a great addition to our community, folks. And it's beautiful design.
Really is stunning.
I have one question. I thought we had a 4th waiver request.
Say it again.
I thought we had a 4th waiver
The
request.
glazing one, which I did not see at the bottom
The,
specifically.
The glazing one was number 1, but there was parking and the setback.
Happy to add another.
So the 4th one, which was setback, when staff looked at that, sorry, I probably should have explained this. In the Design Lewiston standards, we do have a maximum building setback of 10 feet. That was never added to Article 11. So it was staff's interpretation that that is actually not binding, and it's optional.
Okay, we're going to take that up separately. Great.
And in addition, it's not waivable, really. That would be Board of Appeals. So it's to our accidental benefit, all of us, that it was not added to Article 11. So that's something for the board and staff to discuss.
Tonight, in other business.
For future amendments or discussion, whether we want to have that be part of the requirements in Article 11.
Does that satisfy you?
Thank you.
You're
very much.
welcome. Thank you, guys.
Great.
Congrats.
Thank you.
I have something for the executive director. 2-minute recess.
Oh, sure, we'll take a 2-minute recess. I'll be bringing it up in our business team. Lisa will be bringing that up in our business team. Yeah. Sorry, let me try that again. Yes.
Management 101.
Indeed.
Why? What a nice idea.
Have a good night, you guys.
Congratulations.
Good luck with your event this weekend.
Yes.
We said 2 minutes. I feel like we're at 1:30-ish. Who's counting?
10 seconds.
Huh?
2 minutes and 10 seconds.
It could be.
12 seconds.
Yeah.
2 minutes and 14 seconds.
And I call us back to order. Right? Felt like that, right?
Thanks, Gabby.
Bye. We're going to move to item 5, other business. Does anyone on the board have other business? 'Cause I would like to add the discovery of the item that was not permanently placed in the design district overlay that we discussed just previously. May we take that up for discussion?
Absolutely. So in the Design Lewiston standards, section 4 of it has standards that are specific to each zoning district. And so if you had that in front of you, you would see that, for example, in the riverfront district, there's a front setback minimum of 5 feet and a front setback maximum of 10 feet. So the intent would be that a new structure is forced to be up near the street between 5 and 10 feet setback. In our design, in our Article 11, district regulations, when you get to the bulk chart, we only have minimum setback. We don't have maximum setback in there. In this case, we weren't able to find a way to make the addition not applicable. Like when you look at the design standards, the way it's written, it applies to an addition as well. So it's not.
Sorry, Shelley. I don't have a question about how we've applied it this evening. I guess the question that I'd like to ask before you go any further down that pathway is what would it take to ensure the intention of this board is permanently in the charts for going forward? Because that would be a waiver we would have happily discussed tonight, but I think the intention around ensuring that there was not significant setbacks was the intention of the board during that. So what would it take for that to be updated?
It would be like any ordinance change. Since it's going to be in the zoning and land use code, it requires initiation, which the planning board could do, and public hearing, and then recommendation to city council.
Thank you. Mr. Pine?
Could we start working on this now? Could I request initiation on coming up with some language on it, or what?
I think the
what would be
language has
this?
been proposed. It sounds like we just need to enact it and make it final in the documents.
Yeah, true and true. What staff's concern is that technically a waiver isn't grantable for a setback. So it would be very hard. They would have to go to Board of Appeals, and it's not clear that it could be grantable. So in a situation like this, we would have had a requirement that they had to be no more than 10 feet from the road with their building addition. So I feel like we need a discussion about whether we're treating additions differently, whether there's some flexibility with this standard for how the board applies it. So until I think we have that discussion, which we can have it right now, we're having it potentially. I think we want to think about how we might codify that in Article 11, or whether it becomes a guideline. Essentially, that's how I'm interpreting it is a guideline in the Design Lewiston standards that then there's the flexibility to apply that and say, well, we prefer it to be set back only 10 feet, but since it's a guideline, it's not a requirement. So the question is kind of how much teeth do we want that to have?
Yeah. Well, and we're spending a lot of time talking about the setback in that piece. I wonder if the focus of the language could be around new construction of fully detached buildings, which would address your issues around parcels that already have structures on them and the way an addition might be connected to it, because I think that was the original intent, that somebody wouldn't come into a parcel that is bordered on both sides with buildings that have, literally front steps and they set back 20 feet. And so I wonder if that is a way to think about the workaround that allows the flexibility that you would need in these types of scenarios, but that also in line with the design district standards and their original purpose and intent writ large was to set forth the type of design we'd like to see, particularly if it's going to be hard to grant a waiver in that scenario. Mr. Marcotte.
Yeah, I was just wondering, so if I'm hearing right, it's 5 to 10 feet and it's zone specific?
Yeah, so in Riverfront, that's the wiggle room you have is literally
5 to
that
10.
5 feet for placing your front facade. In the downtown residential, for example, it's also 5 to 10. I think Centreville is 0 to 5. Centreville is 0 to 5, and actually we wanted to bring a change to you at some point over that. We've run into a couple of situations where they've had to go to city council for an agreement for footers of the building to be under the right-of-way, under the sidewalk. They've had to talk to DOT about it. They've been doing that with the DeWitt building. There's been discussions about that over on 61 Ash, where you'll be seeing that design at your next meeting. So Public Works would prefer not to see 0 as a setback. We've also had to you've granted a couple waivers for putting landscaping within the right-of-way. If we force people to have the building set back a little more, then the street trees need to be in front of their building on their property and don't end up being in the city right-of-way. So now that we've worked with these standards for quite a few urban buildings that are happening on the street, we're starting to see areas where we maybe need to tweak that a little bit. And maybe, since we do want to see that landscaping, having a building setback 10 or even 15 or 12 feet may be appropriate to allow some of that landscaping. So I think some of these, all of these setbacks should be looked at as kind of a group discussion.
So it was Regulation 11, you said?
Yeah, so our setbacks are typically found in the Zoning and Land Use Code in Article 11, which is the district regulations, and then there's the bulk and dimensional table. And when you look at that, and Craig is going to pull that up for you in a minute here, you'll see that only minimum setback from a street, front setback has been contemplated.
For any zoning?
For any zone, and there's no listing of a maximum. So these few zones that are in the design standards also have a maximum, the other zones don't.
So when the design standards went through the process, it just didn't get into the table?
It didn't get into the table, that's right.
And so the one that we just dealt with, Maine MILL, what was, remind me, the number, where were they at? 5, 10, somewhere in between?
Oh, they're quite far
The whole
because that whole
parking
parking
lot
lot
is
is
set
between
back.
them and
Whole
the.
parking lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the existing building is set back at least 60 feet, I would say, because you've got drive aisle, two rows of parking, so they're probably set back, 70 feet easily existing. So if they wanted to do an addition, it's kind of a hardship to require them to be set back only 10 feet from the road.
So there should be some sort of exception for certain zones or certain, if it's an existing building versus a new building.
Yeah, and specifically within that, I think the other thing we uncovered is if it is an addition to an existing building and they're connected. That was particularly the nut of it here. Mr. Pine?
So, again, sort of thinking about intention on this, the intention with the setback maximums was to sort of honor the existing character of the neighborhood. I was wondering if there is a mechanism other than setback that we can require applicants to have that's around design, because I mean that's what we're really talking about. And there's many ways to sort of have the massing match, or like sort of the visual wall of the building match the existing streetscape without having the building right there. Like we were just talking about the sort of the shadow wall with this corten steel thing. If you had that multiple feet off the building, but the actual building was further back, you could have planting under it. Like, that's just an example. So I wonder, is there a better term than setback that we could use to sort of describe this situation, to require people to have something that's matching sort of the rhythm of the buildings on the street or in that area? And then around the question of additions.
Then I'd make a note that these are questions we can seek to answer in a further discussion, and that we don't expect an answer today.
Not tonight. This is just like, we're starting the process, let's get everything out, and we can talk about it in the future. Around additions, I think we'd want to be careful, again, because it's about sort of visual stuff. You know, if I find a building in the Mill District and I make a long skinny corridor off of it and then just build some other building on the lot that's connected through that, I mean, technically that's an addition, right? They're connected buildings, but it doesn't meet the spirit of what we're going for. So trying to find language that describes sort of the massing and visual aesthetic would be my preference, or if we can find something, because I agree, like, setback seems like a pretty heavy-handed tool for this.
There's a number of areas in the design district overlay where we reference averages of properties on either side to set the tone of what is in, not just in that neighborhood, but as in that street or that section of that neighborhood, which can vary wildly, but that you're looking for that, the nature of the environment. So that might be language that we could look at. It sounds like, Shelley, that we would be looking for a future agenda topic that not only allows us to look at this section in particular, but I would add that staff does some good thinking with some of your peers in different city departments. I think the intention always was to do something bold with the design district overlay, with the intention of looking for feedback and making alterations. And we've reviewed a couple of things previously around glazing, first floor height requirements for windows, as well as some of the items that have come up, and then certainly a lot of discussion about blank walls. And so maybe we could have an intentional kind of how are we doing review that offers some guidance from staff into areas that have been particularly prickly to walk through for our learning, and then also our discussion and guidance on what amendments might be made.
That sounds good. And I think one thing we're finding as staff is that everything is unique in its own way, right? So this particular project, there wasn't a uniform setback because it's a dead end. There's nothing across the street. There's really, so that's the trick for some projects. It's just what we've written is always going to have some.
Yeah. Well, and I think
flaws.
I'd reiterate it again, but I think the intention of the design district overlay, as we spent many conversations getting to something we were really proud of, is to state an openness to development and to set forth a vision of what kind of development we'd like to see, and for that to be an invitation for discussion. And so I would say on those fronts, it seems to be working well for its original intent. The last thing I think that we want to achieve with any amendments to the design district overlay is something that makes it so seemingly clear that folks feel as if there is not a discussion to be had. I think that's the intention, right, is to encourage people to be creative and to know that we're both open to that, and here's some guidelines around what we're looking for in that criteria. Mr. Pine.
Yeah, I just to sort of add on to that, that was before my time with the board, I think, but, having this written up, we should strive for language that, sort of like the 80-20 rule. 80% of the projects can just sort of look at it and they say, yep, we can meet this, we can go through, but it still allows for the flexibility for those other folks. We don't want to have something that's like overly prescriptive.
I think once you see them, you'll find that.
Yeah, and then at the same time, we don't want, and I'm talking specifically about our changes, right? Whatever we're going to change in this. And at the same time, we don't want to make something where every project has to get our opinion, right? Because that's just not consistent. So putting that on the record, something I'd like to see.
Anything else from anyone else in this or in other business? No? Then we would look to have a motion to adopt the July 8th, 2024 draft minutes.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion about the minutes? That was a hesitant approval. Okay, then I'm going to call roll. Mr. Dupree?
Yes.
Mr. Roy?
Yes.
Mr. Marcotte?
Yes.
Mr. Pine?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Weisenberger-Albert?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Thank you. Hearing nothing else, would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And a second? Thank you. We're adjourned. Have a nice night, everybody. See you August 12th. Yes. Says the documentation here. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I got the book. I'll go shut them all down. Oh, you're gonna go shut the video? You gonna shut the video down? Yeah. I'll go. The doors.
Lee, you know the hard thing about your last name is that they're not up here. Well, no, and then we have a Roy up here, and I'm trying not to look at our city council references and call out the Ryan. Good night, Roger. Just so you know, that's the struggle, is that I make the mental switch over, and then I'm like, oh, not log champs. We're not in that meeting. That's not what's happening. You're good. I'm responsible. You're sweet about it.